Welcome back to the Dionysus Circle podcast. I'm Dr. Sam Bennett, and today I share a conversation with philosopher Karsten Harries about his recent commentary on a work by Nicholas of Cusa called On Learned Ignorance, which I believe was published in the year 1440. I began by asking Karsten about what spurred him to write the commentary. I hope you enjoy.
Well, first of all, I've been interested in Nicholas of Cusa ever since my teens, really, and worked on him off and on. I think the second paper I published was on Nicholas of Cusa. And I kept teaching him in graduate seminars for many years, especially Learned Ignorance. When I wrote Infinity and Perspective, the hero of that book is really Nicholas of Cusa. But as I went over that book, I felt I didn't do justice to the richness of his thought. And I felt I should really write a commentary on the book, which would go into every detail. So in part, it was, I wanted to, almost as if I had to pay off a debt to a thinker whom I consider very highly.
Yeah, on the one hand, your commentary is a very detailed exposition of the text itself. But on the other hand, it also includes sort of your own perspective, your own philosophical thinking, and your own sort of interest in Cusa. It's a very nice balance between textual exposition and also a sort of living appropriation of the text, where we kind of see how Cusa might be relevant and maybe even essential to our own philosophical moment.
Well, I do think that Cusa retains his relevance today. And I would say I don't think any other philosopher is closer to what I consider central than Nicholas of Cusa. So when I write about him, yes, I write also about my own philosophy. And in many ways, I find that he gives more adequate expression to it than any other philosopher I know. The one who would come close is this Kant.
Yeah, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about that. How, in some ways, what intrigues you and what you seem to value in Cusa seems to also be found in Kant. So maybe we'll be able to touch on that. But one of the things that you've considered central in your work, it seems to be an engagement with modern philosophy in a sort of, you have a kind of critical approach to modern philosophy in some ways.
Well, in a way,
right.
It is tied to the claim that our reason can do full justice to reality. And I'm convinced, as was Nicholas of Cusa, that it cannot. So it is, there's a tension between what we can know and what they're finally, and reality here. And I've worked this out in other works too. I've spoken of the antinomy of being, so that being will always prove in the end elusive. We'll never fully understand being. And yet it doesn't mean skepticism, because we can know an awful lot about nature and so on. And that has to be recognized if we are going to do justice to the world in which we live. So you have to recognize, on one hand, the achievements of our science and technology, and on the other hand, recognize that there are limits and try to work this out. And there, I think Cusa is a guide.
Yeah. It seems like your perspective on modern philosophy is that, on the one hand, you're trying to do it justice, and in that respect, maybe in a way although in certain respects your philosophy resembles Martin Heidegger, in terms of taking a critical stance toward modern philosophy to some degree, as well as a concern with the technological society in which we live, as well as a concern with nihilism. Those things you share with Heidegger, but on the other hand, it seems you're trying to do a bit more justice.
Yeah, well, I would say what I find inadequate about Heidegger, you're right that there's a great deal where I agree with him and I've learned from him. But I think his understanding of technology is finally inadequate, or of science and technology. He cannot do justice to the progress that indubitably science has made. And that progress has two sides. It threatens even our humanity. But we cannot deny that we know an awful lot more about nature. So there cannot be a total incommensurability. There has to be also a commensurability between the way things are and what we can know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But on the other hand, let's just to emphasize for the listeners, you would see, as I understand you would see a fundamental error in thinking that being is fully commensurable with reason, that reason is capable of exhausting being in terms of being entirely knowable. And in some ways, Descartes, for example, might, for you, represent a kind of crystallize this ideal of epistemic sovereignty, and someone who, if something was not fully intelligible, you just cast it out of reality. You consider it an unreal.
And in that sense, in a way, I want to take a step back from Descartes to Nicholas of Cusa. That's one way of putting it. I agree with Cusa that between the infinite and the finite, there is no proportion. So that's crucial, that thought, for me.
Yes.
And yet we cannot push that to the point that you make of Cusanus, as some actually interpreters have done, a total skeptic.
Right.
He's not a total skeptic. He believes you can know a lot about nature. Indeed, he's one of the first to argue for a mathematization of nature, of science. So mathematics provides a key for an ever better understanding of what is out there.
And so to emphasize that point, the infinitum, infinity ad finitum nulla est proportio. Between the finite and the infinite, there is no proportion.
Right.
This Cusan formulation, which I suppose predates him, but it plays a very important role in his thought.
Yeah.
And
in my thought, I accept it.
Yes, right. And this idea is that, there is no, that the infinite cannot really be compared to the finite. There's no proportion between the infinite and the finite.
It's very tricky. In Cusa, on one hand, what you say is right. But we also have to recognize that we say one number is greater than another number, although the number sequence goes on ad infinitum. And in one sense, every number is equally distant from what we might call the greatest number, which is only an idea of thought. We cannot make sense of the greatest number.
Right.
But yet it provides us somehow with a measure so that we can say this number is larger than that number, which we obviously do whenever we count. So we must be able to make judgments of better approximations here, even though they all remain infinitely distant from the ideal.
Right. Yeah. And that's where maybe we could, return to this idea of how in some ways what you appreciate in Cusa, you find in Kant.
Yeah.
But in some ways not. So the way in which you want to acknowledge a type of there's an element of ontological transcendence. There's something in being. There's a dimension of being. Let's say God, who is infinite, and therefore our proportional thinking that relies on comparison, would seem to inevitably be shipwrecked at God as the infinite. If God is the infinite and there's no proportion between the infinite and the finite, then ultimately comparative thinking, maybe even rational thinking, will not be able to grasp that reality, the God as the ground of all reality. And that reminds us a little bit of Kant, in that he also acknowledged certain limits to human understanding. We do not understand the thing in itself.
Yeah, but what I find clear in Cusanus is that he recognizes that the infinite, although absolutely transcendent, must yet provide our thinking and actions with a measure.
Yeah.
That he recognizes. And for him, therefore, also the doctrine of imago Dei, that we are the image of God, created in God's image, becomes very important to him and to me. And within ourselves, we carry an idea of the infinite, which invites us to think of the largest number, the ideal human being, and to make these the measure of our actions here, even though we know that they will never be fulfilled.
Right.
Here. And yet they provide a measure. So I can say, just for him counting, it goes on ad infinitum. The largest number is, in a way, an impossible thought, and yet it provides our thinking with a measure in that we can say 7 is more than 4, and simple statements like that. We constantly measure, and that presupposes something that, although finally not available, yet guides the progress of our thinking or whatever. Yeah, and science depends on that. So there's a regulative ideal of nature as totally transparent to knowledge. It will never be reached, but yet we can say that science has made progress without difficulty.
Right. So it seems like in Kant, what lies beyond the limits of our knowing, it reminds me a little bit of in the Inferno, when the famous speech that Odysseus gives regarding I suppose the story that Dante creates of Odysseus and his men going beyond where they should go, and they end up dying in shipwreck.
Right.
And in there, that reminds me of Kant insofar as it's a fool's errand to transgress the limit. Crossing the limit, there's nothing really productive in attempting to cross that limit. Whereas in your thought, you want to somehow draw and acknowledge a limit to human understanding and reason, but at the same time, like you said, drawing on Cusa, somehow this infinite, which we cannot ultimately grasp or contain conceptually, is still, it marks us. We are marked by the infinite, and that's the imago Dei kind of idea. And then also, like you said, the infinite is going to provide the measure.
Yeah, we carry the thought of the infinite within ourselves. Every human being, in that sense, is marked by that possibility of thinking the infinite. And that is involved when we think of the ideal human being. The ideal human being is a thought rather like the largest number, impossible to realize, and yet it guides the progress of our thinking and doing, action. It provides morality with a measure.
Right. And that's one of the difficulties with understanding Cusa and with struggling with him is how could that which exceeds our understanding, that which in principle lies beyond
and
our
he wrestled
understanding.
with this in part, was thinking with the problem of the incarnation.
Right.
God had to reveal himself in the finite to be at all relevant in any way here. And a first revelation is the creation. And the creation, God becomes, if you want, visible. And of course, the birth of the incarnation in the person of Christ is a second incarnation here. But the creation is already a first descent, if you want, of the infinite into the visible.
Yes, yeah.
Every finite thing partakes of the infinite here. We will never understand fully even a leaf. Kant pointed this out, even a blade of grass. And yet we make progress. We understand things better and better.
Yeah. Yeah, he has this wonderful analogy of of the polygon, trying to use a polygon to recreate a circle. So, he says that a polygon, however many angles it has, never becomes equal to a circle.
That's right.
Unless it is resolved into the circle. And so you can imagine, you have a circle on the page and you first draw a triangle and okay, that in some ways approximates the circle, but then you improve it by giving it 4 sides. And then you give it 5 sides.
The metaphor, which, by the way, we find already in Dante, that if we could square the circle, we could know God. That's basically the same problem.
Yeah.
But we cannot square the circle, and that has been rigorously proved.
Right.
But that does not mean, and that's interesting, that does not mean that we have any difficulty calling one polygon more adequate to the circle.
Right.
Than another. The one with more sides comes closer to the circle. So there is no question here of being able to distinguish better from worse.
Yeah. Clearly, the 5,000-sided polygon is closer to the circle.
Yeah, that's right.
Than the 3-sided polygon, but that's yet it's still
infinitely distant.
Right, because we can add as many sides as we want.
Yes, you want, and that can go on. It's like the largest number.
Right.
It's always the same figure, really, for Cusanus, which repeats itself endlessly.
Yeah.
Like the curved and the straight line and so on.
Yeah, and maybe we can go back to the idea of imago Dei. Yeah, you think that you have some very strong statements about this being sort of...
I think basically this is this offers the key to, on one hand, doing justice to science, and yet recognizing its limits here.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I spent a lot of time on Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein in the Tractatus sort of gives you a model which can be compared to imposing a grid on some blob, and you can get closer and closer to an adequate description of the blob by imposing a finer and finer grid and filling in what looks darker to you. But you will, the description in terms of the grid will never do justice to a curved line. Never.
Right.
So there is an infinite gap. How adequate your description may be, and that's a little bit now the problem of the relationship of the computer to reality. Here, it's a little bit like the computer, in a way, imposes a grid and can get terribly accurate. But there will always be a gap. Just as the curved line will never be captured by the square grid. Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like this connects to the issue of nihilism, where you're worried that in modern philosophy, if we exclude the element of transcendence, the recognition that something always lies beyond our constructions, beyond our conceptual frameworks. If we
coupled with the thought that it provides us also with a measure.
Right.
That's crucial.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, what attracted me to Cusanos, that combination.
Yeah.
That he sees clearly that we need both. And of course, for him, faith allows him finally to say that there was, in fact, the perfect man, maybe Christ.
Right, right. Yeah, you know, I'm reminded of that famous quote from Heidegger that science doesn't think. And on the one hand, you know, that seems to be, you know, dissimilar to your position.
Yeah, I agree with basically, yeah.
But on the other hand, it seems like you would agree that science itself is maybe not capable of providing a source of meaning, a source of existential orientation.
That's right.
And that ultimately, to find and to ground meaning in life, we do need something beyond science.
But I think, on the other hand, one has to admit also that a mathematician like Cantor, with his set theory, I have a footnote to that, I think, in my book, came very close to thinking about God, even.
Right.
So that there are some scientists who I would say think, and when they think, they become philosophers.
Right. Yeah, I mean...
so I wouldn't want to say just science can't think.
Right, right.
It doesn't think when it does a certain type of work.
Yeah. So...
But scientists should become more thoughtful.
Yeah, I mean, it seems intuitive that, you know, if the scientist's goal is to understand, let's say,
reality
or the natural world, and if it realizes, you know, even this rose is inexhaustible, that I can never quite fathom it and capture it in all its particularity, in a way, that's science itself coming up against the infinite. That you know, in a way, this rose itself is a is this, you know, it
cannot lead to a final conclusion.
Right. And so there, it seems like, it could be part of science to recognize. But I suppose, on the other hand, you know, there's a difference between thinking, in a way, the particularity of a rose or something in nature is inexhaustible. We can never describe it fully. That type of infinite is different than the kind of infinite in Cusa, where we're talking about the infinite as the ground of all reality, as the inexhaustible source of all being. And so that's a type of religious or theological.
Well, I think that these two finally blur. That is, that if I really meditate on the leaf and see the infinite in the leaf, I think that's where Meister Eckhart, I think, it gives us an important pointer when he says, you know, that to really see the leaf as created by God is better than seeing an angel. There's an important truth here, that is, every created thing partakes of God's infinity.
Yeah.
And when we open ourselves to its infinity, we also open ourselves to God's infinity. So that easily leads to a kind of nature mysticism.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of how we partake of the infinite and how we, the human being, resembles the infinite, you make a very big emphasis of our creative capacities, our ability to create. That our ability to create is one way in which we really see that resemblance, I suppose.
Yeah, and there I see a difference between Plato and Cusanus. That is, Cusanus, unlike Plato and more like Kant, emphasizes the creativity of the human knower. That is, language for concepts for Cusanus are an unfolding of the human mind. And so in this sense, he becomes a critic of Plato on this point.
Yeah, it's, for example, with mathematical forms, it seems like Cusa has this constructivist.
Yeah, they're all an unfolding of the human mind.
Yeah.
And that goes also for concepts. Human mind unfolds itself here in our relationship to nature, but it's still the human mind that.
Yeah. But on the other hand, he does say that he has a line, something like God, uses geometry and arithmetic.
And those locutions are in a way necessary, but in a way, all these positive statements are, in a sense, false, literally taken.
Yeah.
But we want to say something like that because we have to recognize the affinity between what we can know and the divinely created reality. So there must be some sort of affinity. So when we, with our mathematical constructions, can do justice to nature, that leads easily to statements like God created the world, using mathematical form.
Right.
Yeah. But that's not to be taken absolutely literally. I mean, in a sense, all positive statements about God for Cusanus, taken absolutely literally, are false.
Right. Yeah, he had famously, God is beyond every affirmation and every
But
negation.
one has to distinguish that from a totally negative theology, and that Cusanus keeps that idea of the measure, the elusive measure that yet illuminates our thoughts and actions.
Yeah, he, thinking of the title of the book, On Learned Ignorance, he says that the precise truth shines incomprehensibly.
That's right.
Within our ignorance. So even within our ignorance, within our inability, let's say, to grasp the infinite.
Yeah.
And this seems to be unlike Kant, where within that ignorance, somehow there's a relation, there is a connection still to the infinite,
That's
even
right.
if the infinite is not fully graspable, fully.
By the way, we don't want to get into a discussion of Kant here, but
yeah,
Kant has the idea of the transcendental object, which must be distinguished from the thing in itself. I think many people confuse the two. The transcendental object is the ideal object that when I try to understand anything, my effort is haunted by this idea of a complete understanding of nature. That's the ideal transcendental object. That's an ideal that haunts my work. But this is not the thing in itself. The thing in itself transcends the transcendental object.
Yeah. So
that part of Kant I take very seriously.
Yeah.
And of course, I take very seriously the critique of judgment as an attempt to bridge the gulf between the first two critiques.
Yeah.
So in a way, beauty for Kant too is the bridge that is necessary to hold the whole together here. That gap which has been opened up between freedom and nature, really.
Whereas in Cusa, you emphasize that the bridge is given in Book 3 on Christ, that Christ as
Christ is really the paradigm of beauty, if you want.
Yeah.
The incarnation has a very similar function to that of the critique of judgment.
Yeah.
That this beauty has to bridge the gulf, and for the believing Christian, that beauty becomes incarnated in Christ.
Yeah. Can it ultimately be understood how? Because if there's no proportion between the infinite and the finite, you might think well, no bridging could be possible. Cusa says in Christ, the absolute maximum and the contracted maximum, the universe, somehow coincide.
Mm-hmm.
But is that ultimately understanding how he could bridge that gap? Is that also something that we could never grasp intellectually, or?
Well, the gap itself, it's a little bit like your circle metaphor.
Yeah.
There will always be the gap between the circle and the polygon, no matter how many sides you add. How do you understand that difference? In other words, we have no trouble understanding this difference. We have an intuition of the circle. We know what the polygon is. We can even make proofs that the circle cannot be squared. But how do you understand the difference here?
Yeah.
But I think that's the same problem.
Yeah. And it seems that, there are other interpreters of Cusa, more recent interpreters, Ernst Cassirer, where they do not emphasize quite as much this third book on Christ.
Oh, yeah. No, I think that's true. And for me, it is really not only a central part. In a way, it's necessary to complete the system,
Right.
I think. And of course, there is in the third chapter, there's that step from what reason, where reason can lead us and where faith comes in. And to believe that there was a concrete, an individual who is the incarnation of Christ, that only faith can lead you to. You can't. Reason can create the idea, but to occupy the idea requires faith.
So reason can lead us to seeing that there is a gap and that it needs to be.
So reason can certainly cast a lot of light, even of a lot of the mysteries in the third book. But the crucial step from, as I say, filling in the space and the place that reason has opened up, that takes faith.
Now, if it's also the case that Christ provides a solution to nihilism, then it seems
obviously in a very full sense, but I want to say even the idea in the first two chapters of the third book, even the idea of the coincidence of the infinite and the finite in an individual is good enough to overcome nihilism.
Oh, even the idea, okay.
Yeah, I think even that is enough. But it doesn't give you that, I think, especially if you come to the question of immortality and so on, for that, Christ becomes crucial for Cusanus. Reason cannot lead you there.
Yeah. So reason could lead you to see that.
For morality, reason is enough.
Okay.
And he makes that quite clear, and that we carry within ourselves sort of a natural, he speaks of, I forget this, natural light or something, but he has no trouble. I think I find it indeed more satisfactory than the Kantian morality, which puts too much weight on pure reason. But I think Cusanus has, even without faith, a strong morality. And he certainly can make knowledge sense of cognitive progress.
But perhaps without Christ as a concrete...
He can make sense of it with Christ as an idea.
Yes.
That we, within ourselves, carry this ideal, and that provides our lives with a measure.
Yeah.
But that ideal need not correspond to anything real.
Right. But it would need to correspond if we are thinking in terms of the flourishing or the happiness of the human being. I think for Cusa, our happiness ultimately is not perfectly realizable in
the
this
happiness
life.
For him requires, as for Kant, that requires religion.
Yeah. Okay, so without faith, we can perhaps...
We feel somehow incomplete for Cusa.
Yeah.
There's something that we long for which we don't have.
And is that longing ultimately to see kind of or to kind of join the infinite in some way, or to unite with the infinite, or to see the infinite face to face, as it were? I mean, is that the longing we have? And so even if we can have this idea or an ideal of there being a coincidence of the absolute maximum and the in the contracted maximum, even if we can have that idea,
that
perhaps to really be satisfied, to really be happy, to ultimately flourish in some sense, we would need there to be a concrete, real connection between the finite creature.
But we have something like a connection, even without religious faith.
Okay.
Whenever we meet, for instance, really a human being and open ourselves to the human being as a free person, or even when we sink ourselves into that meditation on a leaf. I mean, that's in Eastern thought, that sort of thing becomes very important. That we meditate on, if you want, the leaf as an incarnation of the divine, which it is.
So, I wonder about from the modern, someone entrenched in the modern perspective, they might realize, okay, the otherness of a human being in a way transcends me. The leaf in all its inexhaustible particularity transcends me. But if they don't anchor the infinite that they glimpse in a real, actual infinite, an actual Godhead, will that be sufficient?
Well, it depends on how you experience the leaf. In other words, obviously there's something like grace involved in having that experience of the presence of God in the leaf.
Right.
It doesn't help just, there's something, and that's true, but of meeting another person, to really be open to that person, that also is something. The other person extends something like grace to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think someone who really plumbs that depth of the other person, that inevitably they will, if they really appreciate what makes that possible, they will see that, okay, ultimately this is anchored in a genuine, real infinite that exists beyond me, and that is present somehow in a sort of limited fashion, but still here present in the person? Or can someone have these experiences of the leaf and of the other person and of beauty, but never reach the notion of a genuine...
I think if the experience is full, you don't need to go beyond it.
Yeah.
That's not necessary. It's not a...
Yeah.
It becomes self-justifying.
So it seems that from your perspective then, the experience of the other person and of beauty can be a way out of nihilism, and it doesn't necessarily require...
No, I think it is.
Yeah.
It is the way out of... I think for most of us, that is the other person is the most obvious way to answer the nihilism. I think nature can help. I think for many of us, nature, and especially again in Chinese thought, I wrote a little preface for a Chinese translation of my commentary on the Heidegger's The Origin of the Work of Art, which is now appearing in Chinese. And that preface, maybe I should send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That is, it's a very interesting preface where they had asked me to say a little bit about how is Heidegger thought related to Chinese thought. And there isn't all that much of a relation, actually. But do a pretty good job in making one. So, and I have your email, I take it. Yeah, you sent me an email. So I can send you that. That's an interesting paper.
Yeah, I'd love to read it. Yeah.
And it will appear probably only in Chinese, in a Chinese translation. But I maybe should try to publish it in English. I don't know.
So on the one hand, it seems like Cusa is setting limits on knowledge, in kind of two ways or in two respects. There's the gap between our knowledge and God as the infinite. But then there's also a kind of second gap between our knowledge and the inexhaustible
nature,
particularity of nature itself.
Yeah, and it's in the end the same gap. Because for him, nature has to be understood as having its ground in God. It's just an unfolding of the divine essence.
Right. But still, you would say that understanding he has as nature being an unfolding of the divine essence, one need not have that understanding to necessarily escape the nihilist threat. One could instead find within nature.
One could find in nature and in the other person, yes.
In the other person, okay, yeah. And now maybe we could, think a little bit more about that theological side for a moment, because, I think Aquinas and other medieval thinkers, they also held that God is infinite beyond our full understanding.
You're right.
So do you think that Cusa's approach to God, Cusa's apophatic approach to God, do you think ultimately there remains an important difference between his and these other medieval thinkers when it comes to the infinite?
Think that it's related to Cusa's rejection of an Aristotelian anthropology, which I think Aquinas basically keeps. Yeah. And of course, he keeps the natural philosophy of Aristotle. And Cusanus rejects both. So he puts an altogether modern weight on the human being as maker, as creator.
Yeah.
So the human being is given a new dignity by Cusanus, which goes beyond what Aristotle could furnish Aquinas with.
Yeah, and we've already kind of emphasized that. So for example,
I think it is that creativity of the human being, which receives an emphasis in Cusanus, that breaks totally, as he is aware, with Aristotle. Here.
Yeah.
So in a sense, he undermines Aristotelian science and also the Aristotelian anthropology.
Is he undermining the Aristotelian science in that, does he not give the same kind of role for final?
Well, it's because, of course, causality? In part, the Aristotelian world is finite. And Cusanus breaks it open, it becomes infinite. And with that, the Aristotelian theory of elements loses its foundation. Because the theory of elements is based on secondary qualities. That is, I do that in the book, the table, you have cold and hot and cold and wet and dry. And you can construct the four elements out of that. You have a little table. I give it in the book. But that makes no longer any sense with Cusanus. So the whole physics of Aristotle has lost its foundation. And therefore, Cusanus calls for a mathematical science, which is totally un-Aristotelian. That is, mathematics now provides the key to science. We have to give mathematical descriptions.
Yeah, and in that way, there's a certain similarity between Cusa and Descartes, the emphasis on mathematical structure for understanding.
Oh yeah, very much so. And Descartes had read Cusa. So, but Descartes doesn't do justice to his doctrine of learned ignorance. Descartes comes a little too close to equating what we can know with the real.
Right.
Or if you can put it this way, then going to Spinoza, Cusanus challenges the panarchy of the principle of sufficient reason. The principle of sufficient reason is not adequate to reality. And that's where he agrees with Kant. There's Kant is also a critic of Spinoza.
So where would where is that manifested? That the principle of sufficient reason, is it in that?
That the principle of sufficient reason has limits?
Yeah.
Simply in the split between the infinite and the finite.
Okay.
That's all you need, because reason always will construct what is fundamentally finite. It will never escape the finite.
So
we can sort of understand the infinite, but we cannot reasonably grasp it.
Yeah. So maybe we could talk about, if human reason relies on proportional thinking, if rational inquiry relies on a comparison of the known with the unknown, how is it that we are able to have this thought of the infinite? It's through another faculty, right? He calls it...
It's inseparable from the awareness of our freedom. Simply as free beings.
Yeah. And so is it...
Freedom has no limits. Has factual limits, but as freedom, it has no limits. So whatever boundary you give me, I can think beyond it. Or can ask, what's on the other side of that fence?
Right.
Even if I have no idea of what's on the other side of that fence.
And I think he calls it...
That's, by the way, when Cusanus comes out in the Vision of God with that wall of paradise. He speaks of the wall of paradise.
Yeah.
And he says to see beyond the wall of paradise, of course, the wall of paradise separates what we can reasonably understand from what lies beyond, which is paradise. So paradise will never be understood. And reason has to suffer shipwreck, he says there, in order to glimpse paradise. There's a beautiful metaphor in that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it recalls the idea that in God as the absolute maximum, all opposites coincide.
Yeah.
And he famously, John Venck, the contemporary of Cusa, worried.
And there's a legitimate... I give quite a lot of room, actually, to Venck in the book.
Absolutely.
As a critic of Cusa. And some of his points are very well taken.
Yeah. Yeah, he felt that, this would introduce irrationalism.
That's right.
It would, because it seems reason depends on the principle of non-contradiction. And he felt...
you leave reason... For Cusa, finally, faith leaves reason behind.
Yeah. Now, maybe we could briefly talk a little bit about, how is it that God, because some might think, oh, how could God transcend every affirmation? Ultimately, isn't God the cause of all things? Isn't he necessary? How does he even transcend those names of...
Well, for Cusa, all of these are inadequate, like all positive theology, inadequate analogies,
right,
which we try to express sort of the dependence of creatures on the Creator. But that's an inadequate analogy for him. That does not capture God as he is.
Yeah.
That's why you can say, that the only true, every proposition in negative theology is true, but doesn't say anything. And he says, nevertheless, we need a positive theology because without that, religion would lose all content. The people wouldn't have anything to hold on to. So he defends a positive theology, even as he says, all its propositions are at bottom false.
Mm. And is it because...
But there are degrees of falsehood. Some are more false than others.
Right.
Like the circle, again. That's a wonderful metaphor.
Yeah.
And the Christian theology for him is obviously the most adequate. But that comes out also in his attempt of the reconciliation of the faith. The faiths are all like more or less adequate or inadequate attempts to do justice to the circle with a polygon inscribed.
Yeah, so these analogies, these terms that we use for God, light, the maximum, even cause, they're somehow, they don't strictly apply, but they point
But we
beyond
nevertheless need them to live a meaningful life. We have to make God in a way commensurable with what we can grasp, even though he finally transcends all these attempts. But they're not equally inadequate. Again, that's the important...
Right.
The importance of the measure in Cusanus, that is crucial.
Yeah, and it goes back to the polygon again.
Yeah.
That the 50,000-sided polygon is indeed closer to being equal to the circle.
Yeah. But it's already apparent in these, for Cusanus, all knowledge is really thought of in the image of counting. And already there, we get the idea of progress. That is, numbers obviously progress.
Yeah.
And how can we think that progress? That, by the way, also presupposes that we can think a minimum. We could not count without one. Or some unit.
Right.
We need a unit.
Yeah, oneness is sort of the principle of number.
Yeah. So that's... But obviously mathematics is crucial in trying to do justice to Cusanus, his mathematical speculation.
Yeah. Maybe another theme we could touch on maybe another theme we could just touch on is that Cusa is famous for is the way in which, and Wenck, of course, will interpret this as a kind of pantheism, but Cusa says that something to the effect of all things being in God as in their enfolding, and he and Wenck worries that this is a type of pantheism, and you seem to be, you have the thought
I think the
that,
pantheism talk again takes things too literally again. That's not recognizing the learned ignorance. That it tries to make a statement like creation is God,
right?
But we don't have a sufficient grasp of God and creation to be able to say that.
Yeah. So the statement that all things are in God, it speaks to something true, which is that everything that we are is sort of pre-contained in God. If a creature is beauty, well, the beauty of that creature.
Although again, the containment metaphor, it must be questioned.
Yeah.
It suggests like a big pot.
Yeah. With
God is clearly in in everything real.
Now, you also engage with Meister Eckhart in your commentary, and you kind of, it seems that you think that while Cusa can respond adequately to the pantheist charge, potentially Eckhart does drift too far into the pantheist direction. Am I correct?
Well, he tends, I think Eckhart has a problem a little bit with, if you want the idea of the measure again, that, Eckhart is tricky. I mean, one has to, some of the sermons certainly invite very serious questions.
Yeah. And it would really, it's insofar as Eckhart sometimes seems to suggest there's a kind of direct identity between the creature and God, that really misses what is so important to you, which is this element of ontological transcendence, of something
the
exceeding
distance.
us.
No, that's true.
And
Yeah, and especially among Eckhart's followers, and that the tendency to just collapse really God and the human being, which exists there. The threat of saying, in my essence, I'm God.
yeah. Well, I think, overall, I think we've conveyed how Cusa is really often walking a razor's edge, it seems, he pushes transcendence, but also when you push transcendence, you kind of risk just utter silence and incoherence.
And I think we have to walk on that razor's edge, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
I think responsible thinking has to do that. So there's no escaping it. You brought me a hot tea, right?
I'll go get it. This is my cold coffee.
Oh, that's your cold tea. You can bring me a new tea.
Oh, maybe I'll grab my coffee.
Well, we can go a little more and then have lunch. Did you understand it, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was clear enough.
I ever understood before.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
No, let me put this. Is this my hot tea or?
No, this is mine.
Yeah.
Here, let me. No.
And you can put it here, then I can reach it
I
easily.
will. But,
What?
excuse me.
What?
I spilled.
Oh, you spilled. Well, you can take a towel.
Yeah.
No, one question one could raise, of course, is the two other thinkers who are closest to me are Kant and Heidegger, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And one could raise a question, in what sense do I find Cusanus more adequate than either? Yeah, than either Heidegger or...
Yeah, I was kind of curious what you would think of that famous statement from Heidegger and Der Spiegel that, only a God can save us. It seems like...
Oh, only a God can save us, yeah. That's a despairing statement, yeah. But it means basically only an incarnation of some way in which whatever is highest incarnates itself in the visible, that would be a God, can save us. There's something like that has to happen. We have to experience in the visible the highest.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a kind of acknowledgement that there is a gap.
Yeah, and it takes the Hölderlin statements here. There's a gap, and I think that basically he's right. Only if there are experiences, I would say, of persons, of nature, that bridge that gap,
right?
Can our life have a meaning? I think, obviously, love does it for many people.
Maybe we could touch too on how Cusa's cosmology maybe creates even more tension in terms of, or more, maybe makes this threat of nihilism in a way seem more pressing.
Yeah, because we are lost in an infinite cosmos.
Yeah.
And for all we know, we are alone. And that's sort of a depressing thought. You want something. There's always the same need. We want something to answer. We want spirit to answer spirit. And I think that we should realize that this earth is good enough to answer that need. And so that's why I argue for a post-Copernican. That's sort of a phrase which has caught on, that post-Copernican geocentrism, that is accepting the Copernican revolution, which dethroned the Earth from its central position, yet existentially the Earth retains its central position. And we have to recognize that is, we have to find our love and so on here on Earth, not on some other star.
Would that be a disagreement with Cusa? Because I had this sense of with Cusa, it's like maybe now, given the cosmology that Cusa has, you mentioned the infinite universe and the possibility of many inhabited worlds. So that seems to decenter the Earth. It seems to remove a uniqueness of the Earth, and then acknowledging your concern about the human being having an existential orientation, needing some kind of center.
But you cannot forget that for Cusa, too, as a Christian, the fact that the earth is the place where Christ was born makes it unique.
Right.
And I think in this sense, in a lesser sense, but the fact that I, let's say, can fall in love here, that makes the earth a center. That's what provides my life as a center. Yeah. So I don't think you need faith in Christ to provide that center. I think love will do it.
Yeah, it seems like with Cusa, you might think he wanted that we needed Christ as a sort of spiritual center. Although, like you said, through the incarnation, I suppose the earth regains a type of uniqueness and regains a type of centrality.
That principle of homogeneity, which is a consequence of his cosmology, requires that there be intelligent life somewhere, who knows where.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's what our science has also basically accepted, that principle of homogeneity. There must be some intelligent life somewhere, who knows?
Yeah.
But for all intents and purposes, it's irrelevant, because now with the speed of light and what we know about the cosmos, it's clear we are never going to enter a conversation with other intelligent beings. I mean, that dream is over, I think, in spite of, what is his name? Our Mars guy, Musk.
Musk, yeah. Elon, yeah.
So, no, I think for all intents and purposes, we are alone here on Earth, and we have to accept that this is where we have to find meaning.
Yeah. And yeah, the point of homogeneity is really important to you.
Yeah.
That, in comparison to the medieval cosmos, which is heterogeneous in the sense that you have this sort of structured hierarchy of the world.
And up and a down and everything.
Yeah, you have Earth, and then beyond that, the planets, and beyond that, the firmament of stars, and then beyond that, not spatially beyond, but God.
But as existentially, this life, our world remains our life world, and as such remains the center of our lives. And so that's what I mean by a post-Copernican geocentrism. Post-Copernican, because I want to recognize the legitimacy of science. I think we have to recognize it if we want to do justice to the world we live in. But we also have to recognize its limits again, and that means that we are, in a way, stuck here on Earth in a good and in a bad sense.
If we think of it, the centrality of the Earth being regained through the life world. In other words, this is our world, this is where our life occurs, and in virtue of it being
and of course, for the person of faith, that's the centrality of the earth is guaranteed by the fact that Christ was born here.
Right. So there, it seems like there's a type of subjectivity to it. It's the centrality of the earth, in your thought, would be mediated by our perspective, our standpoint.
Yeah.
It depends on perspective and standpoint. And whereas, maybe the more traditional Platonic position might be that, well, the intelligibility of the world, it ultimately speaks to a real, cosmic, potentially cosmic hierarchy of ideas and hierarchy of external realities, which we can participate in outside of ourselves. And so even if the cosmology breaks down, that kind of hierarchical cosmology breaks down in Platonism, you could still think that, well, this Platonic hierarchy of forms.
Yeah, no, I would say that hierarchical view I think Cusa would reject.
Right. Because he ultimately has a kind of constructivist understanding of Yeah, I guess personally, I would worry that if beauty, if justice, if these various, fundamental notions are constructed, then when I perceive something beautiful, I can't say that it's the radiation, the splendor of something external to me. I can't say this is the splendor of the beautiful. I have to say it's.
Well, I thought we said that
Yeah.
the beautiful is precisely, it has a mediating function. It is precisely where the absolutely transcendent descends to the visible.
Yes, I would want to say that for sure.
But that's,
Yeah.
I would think that that certainly Cusanus would say,
Yeah.
and that you can hold on to
Even with the construction?
with this principle of cosmic homogeneity, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
No, it's of a different order because it happens whenever you see a human being,
Yeah.
or whenever you really encounter a human being.
Yeah.
And that's interesting in Kant. What is the experience of the other person? How does Kant understand that experience? I'm very interested in that question. And the closest, because that is for Kant, the person is the thing in itself, is the thing of freedom makes every person a thing in itself.
Hmm.
So the experience of a person must mean the becoming visible of the thing in itself.
Hmm.
And in the Critique of Judgment, there is a statement where he does indeed interpret the beautiful in these terms.
Hmm.
So it is. So for him, it is when you experience a person that too is uh, a becoming visible of the thing in itself for Kant.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the imago idea.
And that's the beauty. That's I would say, the key to the importance of beauty in Kant.
Yeah, you emphasize in your commentary how the idea of image, imago, is an image.
Imago Dei, yeah.
Yeah, it's not merely a copy. It's not merely something that resembles something else, but it's a presentation of. It's a presentation where the invisible is sort of suggested, even if it's not precisely grasped. And so with the human being, for example.
Well, just as you cannot grasp God, you cannot grasp the image of God at it fully.
Now, maybe we could talk a little bit about the interesting way in which the human being is a kind of microcosm for Cusa.
Well, that is not so difficult to understand, given that the unfolding of our reason is thought of as an image of the unfolding of the divine reason. So the divine reason unfolds itself in creation, and our reason unfolds itself in a recreation of what we experience of God's creation.
Right.
So that gives you the idea of a microcosm right away.
Right, and that's why, we can't think of the plant as a potential microcosm, because it doesn't have that intellectual activity by which it could mirror.
Yeah, so we are a microcosm.
But on the other hand, we're also, because I suppose the angelic intellect could, in a way, mirror the unfolding of God's intellect, but what we have that the angelic intellect doesn't have is that continuity with the lower orders of creation.
Well, it's
the sensory.
It's actually, the question of the angelic intellect is interesting. I think Cusanus has a little bit of a problem with angels, although he does mention them in a number of places. But he does, in an important sense, he doesn't need them.
Because the human being is the microcosm.
The human being. And
the human being.
Christ is Christ is higher than any angel. Right. Even Mary is higher than any angel.
Yes. Yeah. That is that's clear in Dante. For sure.
So he's not all that interested in angels.
Yeah, it's ultimately Christ chooses to elevate the human to unity with God. It's a union of the Word, the divine Word, and the human form. It's not a union of the divine Word and the angelic character. And it seems for Cusa, it's because we are the microcosm, because we have the sensible as well as the spiritual.
That's right.
That we are the fitting.
That's exactly where we are. You know, we bind the sensible and the supersensible together in our own being as God does.
Yeah. It makes me think, I mean, in some ways it seems like art is a more, if this makes sense, a more microcosmic than thought, because thought is more purely spiritual and intellectual.
Yeah, well, when I do my little sketches,
that's what
I do feel that they are sort of like meditations at the same time, on whatever I look at.
Yeah.
And so you do homage to the thing. And that, well, you have the little calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all fits together. And you may want, if you get hold of the Bavarian Rococo Church book, that fills out a lot in a very different way. I don't talk about Cusa at all, I think.
Well, maybe we can have a conversation on the
Bavarian Rococo Church.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, you may want to look at that book I wrote on the last book. What is it called? The Antinomy of Being, I think.
Yeah. Well, maybe to close, could you tell us about what you're working on now? You're working on your autobiography, correct? Yeah.
There's a lot of churches and some philosophy too.
Yeah. Well, Karsten, thank you so much for inviting me into your home and having this conversation with me.
Well, it was a pleasure to have you here. It's good to talk about Cusanus, my hero.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, he is more my hero than either Heidegger or Kant, but they're the other two. So these three thinkers.
Yeah.
Much more. I mean, I've done a lot of work on Nietzsche and Kierkegaard and so on. But they have not become important in the same way as Kant or Heidegger.